Welcome to the 2014 Forum for the candidates for the Montgomery Village Foundation Board of Directors. Candidates this year are Mr. Dennis Clark, who is a current director running for re-election, Mr. David Lechner, Mr. Don O'Neill, Mr. Peter Webb, and Mr. Peter Young, also a current director running for re-election. I'm going to run through the rules very quickly for you. If you have any questions you can regarding the rules, you can certainly ask them when I get through. First of all, each candidate will be allowed up to 2 minutes for an opening statement. After that, we will solicit questions from the audience. Questioner will come up to the podium and address the candidates. If you do not direct your question to a specific candidate, then I will indicate which of the candidates will answer, and then we will go through alphabetically or reverse alphabetically, depending upon my whim. We also have 4 questions that were emailed, and the questioners were validated as being residents in good standing of the village. Candidates will have a maximum of 1 minute for their response. Answers will be timed. Candidates will be given a 15-second warning, like that. To ensure that all questioners have an opportunity to make sure that all attendees have an opportunity to have at least one question answered. People will be asked to address one question at a time, and once we run through everyone's first questions, if people have second questions or third questions, then I'll ask you to pose those questions. Okay, are there any questions regarding the rules? No. In that case, we will begin with the candidate statements, and we will begin with Mr. Clark.
Okay, I'm Dennis Clark. I've lived in the village for 38 years in the Points, Northgate Homeowners Association. For me, it's been a wonderful experience, and my wife, Joan, and I have raised 3 children here. It was ideal. Now, my work life consists of, I'm a research engineer working for the Navy for 40 years. And after that, I became the director of strategic planning down at the Carderock Division down by the river. I've been extensively involved in community activities, especially in the village here. I was an MCSL rep for Northgate when we existed. I'm on the Northgate Board of Directors since 2004. And I've been chair of the Long Range Facility Planning Committee. I also was on a member of the Vision 2030 Committee, and I'm currently a member of the board the last 3 years. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Mr. Lechner?
Good evening, and thank you all for coming tonight also. I've been a resident of Montgomery Village for 21 years, also raised 3 children here. One of them is still here in the school system in Neilsville. My son and my daughter are now in college. It's given me a little bit more time to volunteer here. I work in do defense industry work, similar to Dennis, actually also Navy Department, and also worked at DRS Electronics over at Professional Center for several years. I now work down Tyson's Corner. And I also ran one of the swim teams. I ran North Creek Neptunes here for the last 5 years, as well as having kids there for about 5 years before that. We've been with the team for 11 years now. Also spent a lot of time with the PTA, with Stedwick Elementary School, as well as Neilsville and Montgomery County PTA. I was a PTA president, PTA vice president. I created the education enrichment program at Stedwick with the science fairs and the history day and the world fair. I run the Model UN at the county level this year, and for the last 2 years I've produced and developed the Performing Arts Festival for high school and junior high school groups at the county system. We had 33 school groups performing last year down in Rockville and Silver Spring. Also, I was on the Long Range Facility Planning Committee as well and helped Dennis write the report. Several of us here were on that. I look forward to taking questions, and again, thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mr. Webb. Mr. O'Neill?
Yes. Well, Montgomery Village faces challenges, both internal and external. Internal challenges facing the village are self-imposed ones. Recovering from these effects will take action, not just words. Here are 10 concrete steps I plan to take to impact the issues. Reinstate the earlier 5-minute residence time at MVF board meetings. Keep the Kettler brothers' promise to keep Montgomery Village Golf Course a golf course. Bar all MVF signature use on the internet to protect against identity theft. Renovate the 2030 vision to eliminate objectionable conceptual designs before they become actual designs. Scrap the 4-story parking garage at the professional center. Scrap the relocation of MVF offices to the shopping center. Scrap the 6-story office building at the professional center. Adopt modern earned value management business practices for selected high-value MVF projects, such as the South Valley Restroom and Concession Stand. Designate South Valley Park as an environmental nature preserve. Reduce the cost and limit the environmental risk of the South Valley Restroom and Concession Stand by eliminating the restrooms. Yes, it appears there's more than one restroom in the works. Rectify the MVF board member violation of fiduciary responsibility stemming from the MVSA Memorandum of Understanding that places the interests of the MVSA above those of village residents. Require full disclosure in the MVF board application process by applicant staff and board members by asking each applicant, is your house currently listed for sale? Give the village brand flourishing a rest. It's being run into the ground. I'm committed to meeting these challenges on behalf of village residents. You have a friend in me.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Mr. Webb?
Thank you, Pam. Good evening. I'm Peter Webb. I'm very excited about the opportunity to run for the Montgomery Village Board of Directors. I currently serve as the president of Eastgate Homes Corporation over in East Village, where my wife Kate and I have lived for the past 4.5 years. We welcomed our son Will about 4 months ago. He's not a fan of sleeping. And we look forward to growing our family and helping Montgomery Village grow for many years to come. Personally, I own a small business serving over 1,500 households as a State Farm agent. Me and my 3 employees manage their everyday risks. We help plan for their financial futures and help cope with storms, as it were. I have a strong financial background. I earned my Master's of Business Administration from American University down in DC. I did my undergrad work there as well. And I'm a registered representative with FINRA, so I'm licensed to serve as a financial advisor to clients and help navigate them through the world of investments. I believe my background, my experience, my knowledge would be a great asset to the village. It'll give me the opportunity to work with my fellow directors and my fellow neighbors to be vigilant as we make important decisions, to keep our assessments as low as possible, but at the same time enhancing our services and amenities for all residents. And I just appreciate the opportunity to meet with you all and share my visions and share some ideas, and look forward to hearing your questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Webb. Mr. Young?
All right, thanks, Pam. Good evening, everyone. My name is Pete Young, and I'm seeking re-election to the Board of Directors. My wife Susan and I have lived in Montgomery Village for the past 16 years, raising our family here as well. We have 3 children, Abby, a freshman at University of Maryland, Adam's a sophomore at Watkins Mill High School, and then Anna is my youngest, a 6th grader at Montgomery Village Middle School, and all of which are a product of our community schools. We're both active in school and local community, either by leading or serving on the PTAs for each of the schools and the Booster Club for the high school. We've served as team reps for the Whestone Whale Swim Team, and I've served on both the Long Range Facilities Planning Committee and the Vision 2030 Committee, establishing a long-term plan for the village. I've also served for the past 3 years on the Montgomery Village Board of Directors. Through my experiences, I've gained deep insight into the village and our opportunities as well as our challenges. I'm seeking re-election to the board to continue leading the community forward and build on the progress we've made in recent years. We're not only in the best financial health in our history despite difficult times, but we have made significant progress and investments in our community. Just a few of the many accomplishments during my time on the board include the development of a 5-year plan for financials and capital improvements, no assessment increases for 3 to 4 years, named Money Magazine Top Places to Live, had a new farmers market introduced, renovated lawn theater and music pavilion, a pool heater in Sedgwick, lighted fountain in Theater Pond, wireless internet at several community centers, new Seniors in Action and MVF programs, and coming soon, a fully renovated Whetstone pool with new amenities, a new picnic pavilion in Apple Ridge Park, a new accessible playground in East Village, and as well as a new concession and restaurant facility in South Valley Park. After many years of falling behind, we have achieved much to be proud of. We do, however, face significant issues ahead regarding redevelopment, continued financial pressures, and sustaining the momentum we have built in implementing our plans. If re-elected, I feel I can help continue to lead us through this progress forward, and I welcome your vote.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to remind everyone that this forum is being videotaped, and the tape will be available on the Foundation's website. And on February 7th, in the Village News issue of February 7th, the transcript of the forum will appear. Okay, I will open the floor now to questions. This gentleman? Yes. If you could just identify yourself. Well, once you get up there, that's fine.
Okay, hello. I'm Ben Berman from Duffer Way in Fairway Island. And the town center concept has worked well for Montgomery Village over many years, including the population credit limits, which have allowed us to become a fairly dense community, but have limited the additions to our density and our population pressures. What is your stance, to all candidates, please, on whether these population limits should remain the same or whether they should be allowed to increase?
Mr. Young, would you begin?
Sure. So thanks for the question. I think as outlined in our strategic plans that we've developed, especially during the Vision 2030 process, I think redevelopment of several parcels within the village is not only appropriate but necessary for the continued growth, I guess, or forward progress in the village. As you know, the development all around Montgomery Village is continuing. We are actually in a competitive situation for commercial opportunities, whether they be restaurants and businesses and so forth. As was made very clear during our planning process, some additional density is going to be required to help drive the viability of some of those businesses. So whether that's a redevelopment of the village center with perhaps a mixed-use concept and retail as well as some residential, or potentially the redevelopment of the golf course, which is something that we're studying, some redevelopment and appropriate redevelopment is going to be required if we hope to continue to have the community thrive.
Mr. Webb?
Yeah, I think one of the greatest assets of the village is how it's structured, and I think it was developed that way originally, keeping in mind density and those concerns. But at the same time, I think we need to look at smart growth and some opportunities there in terms of concentrating people who are looking for a short walk or a quick drive to a night out, as opposed to having to travel to a different neighborhood, different city. But at the same time, I think we need to be very sensitive to keeping the beauty and the environmental beauty as it were, of Montgomery Village, because I think that's possibly our greatest asset at the same time.
May I ask you guys if you would state whether you support increasing the population credit limits as part of your answers?
So in order for redevelopment to occur, some increase in population credits would be required. Yes.
Yeah, no, I think that it would have to be taken as a whole with a macro plan at the same time.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes, I don't think we should increase the population credits, and I don't think that doing so would meaningfully increase the probability of success of the village shopping center business at all. It's up to us who live here, the 40,000 strong who already live here, to do that. Adding a few hundred here and there, or 600 even, is not going to make a meaningful difference in that regard. So I'm in favor of keeping the town sector zoning as it was.
Mr. Lechner?
I believe that we as a community need to be very careful that we examine this question holistically. A modest or a minor increase in population credits would allow some development to happen, but I think we should not be piecemealing the question. It needs to be examined in the whole as far as how those population credits would be used up within the redevelopment process within Montgomery Village. I believe pretty strongly that the smart growth concept the county's tried to apply would actually work pretty well here, where we have certain open spaces that I believe should stay open, and we have certain commercial spaces that the development of the Montgomery Village Center would benefit more from having residential units clustered there. I also believe that over the long run, even though other areas are developing and adding density, I say let them have it. You know, there's a lot of traffic on Montgomery Village Ave trying to get out of this neighborhood. Thank you.
Mr. Clark?
Okay, it's hard being the caboose here, but a lot of the ideas have been presented. I would support some reasonable growth in the population credits. I think it's reasonable. I think as long as we make sure we don't increase the density too much, and I think it's necessary for the development of the village center. I think the village center lays at the heart of a new village, and for that, I think we need to be thoughtful about how we grow in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there another question? You can walk in front of us if you want. That's okay.
It's a shortcut.
Hi, I'm Sue Fierston. I'm a resident of Duffer Way in Fairway Island. This is my question for all the candidates. Given Monument Realty's plans to increase traffic on Montgomery Village Avenue and the county's local transportation plans, including the widening of Goshen Road and the impending question of M83, how will you actively involve the executive board in the planning process? And would you support the hiring of an independent traffic consultant to evaluate the traffic situation in our town?
Mr. Webb, would you like to begin?
I think the transportation is going to be a major focus for the next few years and probably the next many years, whether it's the current plan development or any development down the line that we haven't seen. I think it's very important that we maintain our focus on maintaining our current right-of-ways, maintaining our current structures, whether it's the way our kids walk to school, the way we walk to our village center. And I think focusing on periphery improvements of 355, which I believe are options 2 and 5 of the transportation plan, and maybe even option 1, which is a no-build development plan of relying on what we have now. In the future, I think there's going to be heavy focus on mass transit, just being more accessible to those who live in the village, but also be able to draw people who don't live in the village to possible amenities that are coming in the future.
Mr. O'Neill?
I don't think we should have a traffic consultant because the state and the county numbers from their studies are going to be the ones that dominate. We would just be spending money and have maybe even something that was comparable. I don't know. I think that on Goshen Road, we should hold the line there. I went out and measured it physically on my own, and I thought, well, 61 feet is just going to be about fine for a few extra lanes there, but they're up to 91 foot maximum right now, 4 lanes, and then bike paths and so forth, and it's taking people's property. I think that we ought to hold the line there. On the M83, I think we ought to stick to 1, 2, and 5 and insist that everybody in the HOAs in Montgomery Village do the same and not let us get splintered as has happened. Thank you.
Mr. Lechner?
One thing that gets me really excited is talking about traffic here. I suffer it every day, getting out of the village and then up and down 270. I don't think we should be, our community should be torn up to create commuter paths for the up-county residents that don't want to buy into this neighborhood. They want to buy up there, they can drive from up there down here. I say no to widening M83, no to widening Goshen Road, no to widening Whiteman Road. I think our village transportation policy should be much more clear that we don't support a traffic highway through any part of the village. I also think it'd be useful to hire a traffic consultant on our own. Actually, the county transportation department, they conduct studies, and if an intersection has 1 or 2% more traffic than the threshold, they declare that a failure. They count up the failures and they justify the project. And it's a very biased methodology. So they don't do a cost-benefit analysis at all.
Mr. Clark?
I'm not sure I would hire a traffic consultant for the village per se, because the problem is not the village. The problem is everybody outside the village. And I had the opportunity to talk with a traffic consultant for Monument Realty. And he had a figure of merit for all intersections in Montgomery Village. This is how they design it. It was 1425, I think, was for every single intersection. And even with the Monument Realty development, it never got above that. The only place that was above that is Whiteman and Montgomery Village Avenue, saying that people are coming from all over the place to come down through the Village Avenue to get onto 270. Now, the situation is going to change when they've finished the Watkins Mill interchange. And that I'm very concerned about, because there are 4 schools on Watkins Mill Road, and we really have got to think about some very clever ways of doing that. So I think it's a county problem that we really have to lobby with the county to solve some of these problems. This traffic is causing us a lot of trouble.
Mr. Young, you're the caboose.
Sure. Thanks for the question, Sue. I tend to agree with several of the folks here in the context of hiring an independent traffic consultant. I think that requiring an appropriately skilled and certified traffic consultant through any development process certainly will provide the data regarding that specific project. But I think, like the others as well, strong advocacy for our position as a community regarding M83, the Goshen Road corridor, and so forth is going to be paramount. Having a unified voice and being strong advocates is important. But I think that with the upcoming Gaithersburg East master plan is the most important opportunity we have to be very kind of forthright regarding our needs and desires. We've done a lot of work with the Vision 2030 plan to kind of put a vision out there of what we what we would like to see in our community. But I think certainly it's a regional issue. We are in the middle of a very rapidly redeveloping and developing up-county area. So I think that most of the effect we're going to have is really regarding some of the macro plans, not specifically just unique to our micro community.
Thank you for the question. Thank you. Next question, please. Dennis?
Good evening, Dennis Barnes. Been here since 1975, serving a couple of HOAs. Mine's really a follow-up to the Goshen. You have been very responsive to the Goshen situation. But I do want to add this point and get your opinion. The current Montgomery Village Foundation policy, as I understand from President Heidorn's testimony approximately 2 years ago, was to support the widened Goshen Road up to a certain point, I think around 94 feet. After that, he was opposed. But my concern is, would you be willing to come up with a new resolution, more specifically against the entire widening of the situation, and change that and get that information as a board vote before the Montgomery County Planning Department Planning and certainly the Montgomery County Council? That would be a much more adamant, much more concrete response to the foundation's current policy, which is widening up to 94 feet. That could, as you've already mentioned, can bring all kinds of feeder road problems, traffic noise pollution, and obviously much more traffic coming down from Clarksburg and Germantown, taking advantage of that route all the way through Whiteman Road, up the Goshen Road corridor to Mid-County Highway, left turn up to Shady Grove Lane and in, bingo. And that would, I'm afraid, would just get worse. So primarily, I'd like to opinion on changing the current stance of the foundation's board of director and certainly the president's policy on this issue. Thank you.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes, well, absolutely. I think the board should take a position of no widening of Goshen Road and get a proper vote on it that's unanimous, nothing less, and take it to the county council and wherever else it needs to go. I'm concerned that there's going to be new money coming into the system because of the economy, and all these studies that people have been doing are just sitting there waiting to be implemented when they get the fuel, that is the money to do it. So I think that taking a strong stand on this particular thing is the only way to get what we need. And if they wanted to do something that was sensible, maybe we would come back to the table, but not with all these extraordinary things on the edges that create a loss of property of some of the people that actually live in the village. Dennis.
Thank you.
Mr. Lechner?
Yes, I would be willing to examine the changing that policy and strengthening it, clarifying it, that we're not supportive of making highways through the village in any section of the village. I think that there's also, in the transportation policy, talks about supporting the widening of Whiteman Road to 4 lanes, 2 lanes in each direction. I think that's a horrible thing. I don't understand how we say that we would support that, but we're against option 4, something that would allow option for widening, improving 355. You know, if we're against widening Goshen Road, we're against widening Goshen Road, and we should not be confusing the county transportation department's probably easily confused enough without us saying different things in the same document.
Mr. Clark?
You know, we really have to tackle this problem with the traffic on Montgomery Village Avenue. We have to provide some alternatives. And either side, Watkins Mill and Goshen, they need some modifications. Now, I don't agree with their widening. I mean, 91 feet is like ridiculous. I think we could compromise on something smaller. But I think we do have to work on solving this problem of traffic on the Village Avenue, all the people coming through the village. So some modifications are warranted, I think. We can't keep on going like this.
Mr. Young?
Thanks, Dennis, for the question. I think that there was a lot of confusion around the right-of-way size and widths when this was being discussed, and I think there was actually up to 108-foot wide right-of-way that was being proposed, which would include, I think, a bike lane as well as a sidewalk and pedestrian access. One thing we have to keep in mind, I think, is what Dennis alluded to, is that development's happening all around us. We have to be very mindful of not being no to everything and try to work with reasonable proposals. I'd rather not see Goshen widened, but if we do, to the minimum of the right-of-way extent today, I think, is up to 90 feet, which would include the lanes of traffic, but not separate pedestrian walkways and a bike lane as well. So I think that the county actually has right-of-way that it would include the allowance of 4 lanes, but not beyond that extent. And I could be wrong on that, but I think we got to be very careful to suggest that we would be against any widening of any of the roads, because at the end of the day, we have fought a reputation, I think, within the county of being against everything, and has not actually served our purposes. So to some degree, finding a compromise may be required, even if not preferred.
Mr. Webb?
Thanks for the question, Dennis. I think any question with transportation ties into a macro conversation. Obviously, we need to be sensitive to widening to 100-plus foot. Obviously, there's some middle ground to be found. But at the same time, we don't want to become a bypass. I think it's important with any conversation of development or bringing people into Montgomery Village, we need to give access to Montgomery Village. And I think there is a balance. There's a sensitivity there of respecting people's property, respecting people's rights. But at the same time, we need to be able to give people, outside residents of Maryland, an ability to come into Montgomery Village, ability to use the amenities, to possibly assist in developing our village center and using the shops that we have there. So it's not just the 40,000 people here who has to support them, but maybe we can draw into the areas around us as well.
Thank you, Mr. Webb. Thank you, Dennis.
Hi, I'm Larry Beck. I'm a resident of Park Place, too. Mr. O'Neill, from the letters of yours that I've read in the Village News over the last number of years and your latest candidate statement, I have the distinct impression that you're against everything that's been going on in the village over the last couple of years. So I'm curious, what positive assets would you bring to the board to warrant your election?
Well, thank you for the question. What was your name again?
Larry Beck. I'm president of Park Place, too.
Okay, Larry. Well, look, I think there's an opportunity here with the golf course to put some ball fields in there and take the ball fields out of South Valley Park so it can be an environmental preserve, a nature preserve, put them over there in the golf course arena, funded by the developer and so forth, as an amenity that would be the kind of thing that a developer would do, should the developer develop there. So that's something I would be very much in favor of. I would also be in favor of, if they wanted to have toilets over there, and if Nancy King wanted to have a toilet
named after her, that it could also move to the golf course. But that would be just one little thing that I think would be a positive statement, using the golf course itself and its redevelopment as the vehicle. Keep in mind that we want to keep the golf course a golf course. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Given that that question was directed specifically at Mr. O'Neill, I'm going to open it up to the rest of the candidates to state what they are actually for and what they would be interested in accomplishing in the village should they be elected to the board. And I will start with Mr. Lechner.
Thank you. One thing, I've been very active with this schools and youth, and I think that we have a lot of great youth programs here, but we could have a larger teen program. And it was interesting to me, Columbia doesn't have a large police force. They have a large teen program. It keeps their teenagers busy that way. I also think we could help strengthen the schools further and support the PTAs further as far as people moving into an area because of strong neighborhoods and strong schools. And I think as far as strong community building, a lot of the pools that I go to as far as swim meets have a social calendar, which is so cool. They have barbecues and neighborhood cookouts and things at the pools, and I think that we could do a lot more of that with the various homes corporations. Have a Patton Ridge Day or a Northgate Day at different pools, or an East Village Day at Lake Marion. I'd like to see us buy some barbecues at each of the pools too. Thank you.
Mr. Clark?
I like to think that what I've been trying to do, both with the Long Range Planning Committee and my membership on the board, is get a positive momentum in the village. In the Long Range Planning Committee, we identified 36 possible facilities. Pete outlined some of them. We have built or funded 14 of these, and we still have some more to go. I think the idea that Dave has on a teen center is excellent. We went out to Wheston and Columbia and see exactly how they run their communities and what amenities they had that attracted people. And in the teen center, they had a separate teen house right next to a roller skating rink, what do you call it?
Skate park.
Yeah. Skate park. And same with Wheston. Wheston has a lot of wonderful facilities, like their trail system. And I think that's what I'd like to keep on working on, those 36 items that we identified and that people voted on.
Mr. Young?
Thanks, Pam. So thanks for the question, Larry. I think I can agree with Dennis on much, in the sense that we have both spent time together on a lot of the strategic planning efforts and have actually seen some of those efforts come to light now. Keeping the momentum up and bringing our village forward and making it contextually relevant in today's time is extraordinarily important. Continuing to invest, continuing to build on the investments we've already made is fundamentally critical to our thriving as a community and continued redevelopment. We have many projects that are looming right now, not only the golf course, but potentially the professional center as well as the village center in the future. So I think keeping our momentum up and actually continuing to drive forward and bring our plans to life that the community supported is critical. The other thing I would mention is more of a personal appeal. I think many people often say, well, we need to do and we need to do. What I specifically do is I patronize our vendors in the village center. I go to the stores, I go to the restaurants, I buy and shop there, I buy gas there. I support the businesses that I want to stay in business, and also I'm very involved in the schools. So we need to be engaged in our community and not just talk about doing things.
Mr. Webb?
Yeah, I think my main priority would be, my wife and I moved here 4 years ago from DC. We moved out from the city out here, and we were drawn here because of some of the amenities we saw, some of the environmental beauty, some of the options we saw that you don't have in the city. And I think it's important to not rest on those, but improve them and draw more people out from the city or in from wherever it is, to draw people into this village, because it has so much to offer. And I want it to get to a point where, as Pete says, being able to shop in the stores, it shouldn't sound as a sacrifice. It should be what we want to do. We should want to populate Montgomery Village, and I think it's very important. And part of the key of doing that is being open with residents and drawing in different points of view and being accessible. And I think that's very important, to be respectful of different points of view, but at the same time be able to maintain your drive and maintain the overall vision to achieve long-term goals.
Thank you. Question from Ms. Jones?
Hello, Lou. I am the longtime child of Montgomery Village residents. My name is Noah Patton. And this is going to be kind of a left turn of a question, but let's roll with it. In 2000, the census recorded that 23.2% of village residents were African American, 24% were Latino or Hispanic, 10.7% were of Asian descent. Now, as I look around, I do not see much in the way of representation of those minorities in this room nor at that table. And now my question is, how would you increase minority input and participation on these issues that we've been talking about all night? Because I believe that diversity is one of our biggest attributes as Montgomery Village. Thank you.
Mr. Lechner.
My wife is Asian. I'm very sensitive to this subject, and we've worked very hard on the Northgate swim team as far as trying to make sure that the diversity in the community is welcomed at all of our events. I believe that, again, from the social perspective, people meeting their neighbors and getting together socially with neighbors in a community setting is a great way as far as trying to build that sense of community. And I think it is a good issue, and I think it's something that it's important in the long run for the village. We were sort of planned as a diverse community. It's hard not to feel threatened or scared sometimes as far as certain parts of the village, but I think that we can do more in that area, and I think it's important to keep that philosophy.
Mr. Clark.
That's an excellent question, and it's hard to implement. But let me just cite a couple of experiences. I went over to Kentlands. My son lives over there, and they had German Day. I thought, is anybody German in Kentland? But it was a wonderful festival, and well done. Our church is very much Hispanic, and when we have our fiesta in the fall, there are ethnic celebrations of food and music and dance. And I think things like that, we could certainly do that. We have the facilities, the places to do that. I think we just have to start offering the invitation and say, let us celebrate our diversity. I mean, yeah, we're diverse, but what are we doing about it?
Mr. Young.
Thanks for the question, Noah. Actually, it's a very interesting one. You obviously know well through your own experience that the schools here are very diverse, the community is very diverse. We don't represent that visually at the board, and I think that's a major problem. We see this in the schools, in the leadership positions, in the parent communities there. I can tell you some of the things that we do with limited success is specifically reach out to the communities and draw input and engagement. There's an interesting, I think, cultural sensitivity that needs to exist, that there's an expectation somehow that people should just step up and be willing to take leadership positions. That's not necessarily the natural thing to do in certain cultural communities, and oftentimes you have to specifically invite folks to participate, at which point they do. It's something that we continue to struggle with in the schools, despite the fact that we are very diverse communities as far as the leadership positions. So I don't have an answer for you as to how we can solve it, but I can tell you it's going to require deliberate action, and I think that we certainly do that through our communities and schools, and here at the board leadership level we need to do it as well.
Mr. Webb.
Yeah, I think many residents of Montgomery Village would be surprised to hear those statistics you gave. And honestly, that's one of the things that appealed to my wife and I when we moved out from D.C. was it's not a homogenous community. There is a multicultural sentiment. I will say when we got here, we experienced, while it's multicultural, there's not much interaction. And that's one of the things that drove me to run for my local, the Eastgate board, and become the president. We hosted our first picnic the first spring I was president, because that was important, because I didn't meet my neighbors. I passed them every day, and I didn't know their names, and that just felt wrong. So I think on the micro level, you can do picnics, you can do local drives. With the tragic fire we had a week or so, more than that ago, there was a drive at Safeway. Just little things like that help bring the community together, and I think that helps eliminate the alienation that possibly causes people to not volunteer and not be part of the community. And I think that's a long project, but there are steps that we can take.
Mr. O'Neill.
I think the steps that we would take should be concrete steps that aren't condescending and don't call attention to the fact that we don't have an expression of diversity at this point. For example, we have perhaps the need to couple up the resources we have here in the way of senior people who have good skills and good mentoring abilities with some of the people in other communities that would benefit from that, even though they might not sign up for it initially. If we made it available and then we promoted it somewhat, like we promote flourishing, we could promote some, show up at the community center and learn a little math, learn a little English, learn a little life, and have a set of senior folks who know how to deal with people from all kinds of backgrounds, and just build on something like that.
Thank you, guys.
Good question.
Thanks, Noah.
Next question, please. Rich?
I'm Rich Wilder from South Village. My question is, do you support the coexistence with wildlife policy adopted unanimously by the Foundation Board after a significant forum of wildlife experts and a detailed report prepared with the Committee on the Environment? And this is for everyone.
Thank you. Mr. Clark?
Well, Rich, absolutely. But you know, there are some challenges that we're having now. For some reason, the geese like the grass in the middle of the medians. And sometimes getting out of here, not only do we have to deal with these traffic lights that are poorly timed, but now the geese there. And now in our community, they're eating our lawns. They come up from the lake and now they're eating the lawn. I don't know what's wrong with the grass around the lake. Maybe we have to put something on it or something. But I surely I would think or support that.
Mr. Lechner?
I love walking around Montgomery Village. It's a beautiful place as far as the nature paths and all. I support the community environment statements. I do think that it would be relatively simple. It's not necessarily cheap, but I think we ought to buy some sort of sidewalk washing machine that we could run around the trails once a week or so, especially in the summer. I jog and walk out there, and it's kind of hard to dodge the steps sometime. But you know, I think we could do more as far as the school programs within our environment here as far as nature. And just an example, my daughter and I have been planting milkweed seeds for the last 3 years. We spread them all around because that's the only plant that the monarch butterfly will lay its eggs on. And we were almost running out of them, and we noticed that. My sister told me, and so my daughter and I made it our project, and we now have hundreds of milkweeds over at North Lake.
Mr. O'Neill?
No, I don't support that joint policy of environment and recreation and so forth. That came from a finger in the eye by John Driscoll, who was putting the finger in the eye of environmentalists, saying we're going to split that, and it's really the source of it. I think that the South Valley Park should be an environmental nature preserve. I think the sports programs that are there should be relocated to the golf course in a more robust fashion. And I think that we ought to encourage this South Valley Park as an environmental preserve in ways we haven't thought of yet. I'll leave that to the environmentalists to figure out how to do that, Rich.
All right.
Mr. Webb?
Thanks, Rich, for the question. I don't know, it might sound kind of pithy, but I had an experience my wife went back to work recently, and I'm watching our son more. He saw his first deer and realized that that's a deer. And he's 4 months, so I don't know what he realized, but that's really neat. And I back onto some open space, so it wasn't wandering across the street. And on this panel, I'm fairly new to the village, but that's what drew me here is that exposure. I think that makes Montgomery Village unique as compared to surrounding cities and neighborhoods. And so I absolutely support a realistic coexistence. Obviously, there are safety concerns with deer geese who want to move into your house and deer who do what they do. But I think the beauty and just the amazingness that they bring to our village is very important.
Thank you.
Mr. Young?
So, Rich, you obviously know that not only the diversity of our people, but the diversity of our wildlife is actually one of the founding kind of assets that we have here as a community. And I think all of us enjoy the tremendous wildlife that we have here. I think that there is obviously a balance to strike, and I think the issues around the wildlife with traffic are some of those that we need to be sensitive to, and obviously the careful management around certain green spaces. But I as well enjoy the fact that in my community I've come across deer, fox, heron, geese, coyotes. In fact, we have routine sightings, and it's one of the things that I really value, as well as the community borders, nature areas such as the Seneca Greenway Trail, which I run on constantly. So it's a big part of who we are as a community, and I think that we need to be very careful to preserve and protect it, but also to manage it carefully.
Thank you for your question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rich.
Next question? Oh, come on. You're all here. You must have a question. Okay, I have a question that was emailed. Mr. Berman is here, so he was the one who emailed the question, so. Not you? The reason I'm
Corrected by Mrs.
confused is that it says, that is you. Well, we have now run out of our first line of questions. Would you like to ask a second question?
Thank you.
Exactly.
So yes, I'm Ben Berman from Duffer Way. If I could follow up a little bit, I was very interested in the discussion that you candidates were having about my first question about the population credits. So please, for those of you who believe that the population credits should be increased, or even for those who don't, because there are still a few population credits yet to be used in the village plan, how would you ensure that the development that uses up any additional population and adds to our density, traffic congestion, et cetera, how would you ensure that that is focused around and helps promote the development of the village center?
Mr. Lechner?
I think it's pretty tricky because the town sector zone that we live in right now doesn't say, we don't have, it's just one big zone. So it doesn't say village center town sector zone and the rest of it town sector zone. Right now, though, it's sort of a first come, first serve. Whoever files plans with the county gets to use up the population credits. The town sector zoning, however, would have to be amended to increase the credits. There is an opportunity there for Montgomery Village Foundation to have a discussion publicly and have resident input on the issue of whether a zoning text should further be refined and say, well, zoning text for for the middle of the village and zoning text for the rest of the village, and exactly how that would go. I think that's a possibility, but it's tricky, and luckily we have a legal counsel from the village now to help us navigate that.
Mr. O'Neill?
You can't assure that any increase would contribute to the village center whatsoever. I mean, you might say, let's have rich people come in and they'll spend more money here. Well, that's not likely, actually. So what demographic would you be looking for? I mean, we get into something that's way beyond our pay grade.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Webb?
I think that it is difficult to ensure a direct correlation between increase in density and increase in the productive nature of the village center. But I think working with responsible developers, which to my exposure, Monument, who we're working with now, seems to be very concerned with the macro growth, because it behooves them to have a successful village on the whole, with thriving centers, thriving surrounding areas, and I don't see why quote-unquote rich people wouldn't come to the village if we give them a reason to come to the village. We're we're not betrothed to this position for all time. I mean, I think we have an opportunity in the next few years to market ourselves as a desirable place to maybe not necessarily live, but maybe stop and spend your money. And that also helps the community on the whole, so.
Mr. Young?
So thanks for the question. I think, as was touched on before, the way that the current town sector zone works is that a zone text amendment will be required to increase the population credits. This would be prior to the zone either being changed or altered in some way in the Gaithersburg master plan process. At this point, you can't really tie it to the village center specifically, and in fact, we have no development proposal in front of us for the village center to deliberate about. We only have plans and ideas about what we might like to see. What can be done, though, is when we have a developer like Monument who's here currently trying to work with us on a plan for the golf course, is that we actually have a project that we can debate and talk about. The board ultimately has to support a position, and that will be taken into account in the planning process. But what we have to do is actually work with the concrete proposals that we have in hand as opposed to just vague ideas about what we might want to see. So the village center won't become something real until we actually have a proposal to consider.
Mr. Clark?
Okay, we're at an important junction. We have to decide whether we want to grow or do we want to keep exactly the way it is. And I think in general, if you really want to move the village forward, I think some growth in some new housing stock and some new amenities and things like that be worthwhile. What I've seen of what Monument Realty's plans are is they're very sensitive to this whole idea and very sensitive to the density issues that a number of people brought up in our charrettes. So I think we certainly have to grow. I don't know exactly what the upper ceiling would be, but we certainly are on a path of growth.
Thank you, Mr. Berman.
Thank you.
Larry?
Just to follow up on that a bit, Monument, we all know Monument has said they're going to close the golf course at some point in the near future. So I'm curious as to what four of you would like to see on the golf course in its place. And Mr. O'Neill, you've said 3 times this evening that you would like the golf course to stay as a golf course. I would like to know what some of your ideas would be to keep it a golf course.
Well, Kettler, in his early days, said the golf course shall remain a golf course. That was a commitment made. So it's a golf course. If there's development that would be peripherally around it that would be acceptable, well, that might be considered. I'd like to see the sports fields from South Valley moved up there where they have...
You're not answering the question.
Well, I'm answering the question as a candidate. You asked...
But you said, if I don't want to get into a dissertation, it'll take too much time, but you said 3 times that I want to have the other candidates to answer also. But you said 3 times this evening you want the golf course to stay a golf course. What would you do, how would you go about keeping the golf course a golf course? Not what would you move there, how would you keep the golf course a golf course?
Sir, if the developer comes in and there's a golf course and he's maintaining it for a while and he's going to be building some things there, it would be up to him to figure out how he would maintain the commitment that Kettler made to the rest of this community.
And for the rest of you, what would you like to see on the golf course?
Mr. Webb?
Personally, as a golfer, albeit a mediocre one, I enjoy having my golf course in the neighborhood. But that said, I'm one of 40,000 plus, and evidently I trust people who have studied these numbers and have looked at it, and it's failed as one business. I understand golf is shrinking as a sport, sadly. That I think we can use that space much more productively for the village as a whole. Some amenities, I mean, gosh, the list is endless. You can do dog parks, you can do ball fields, is a good idea. You can do open space, you can do nature fields that are just nice to walk in. I mean, it is an invaluable piece of land in Montgomery County that isn't working as a golf course, and I think we can do quite a bit that would help the village much more than keeping it as a golf course that is not used by many residents of the village, in all honesty.
Mr. Young?
Thanks for the question, Larry. I think, as was clear in the Vision 2030 process, the community has a strong preference to have the golf course as a golf course as long as it is a viable operation. It has been understood that is not the case, and so the position then was taken that appropriate development would be acceptable on the golf course, and I support that position. So given the premise that the course is not sustainable, I think having a permanent roughly 80-acre central park green space that all 40,000 community residents would have access to would be an enormous asset to the community. I think some new housing stock of different types perhaps, and certainly brand new housing stock would also be an improvement in our community that actually has not had any housing introduced in quite some time. It also allows us to bring forward some of the other amenities that we called for in the long-range facility plan that would be brought into the central park, so the dog park and community gardens and so forth. So I think that there's a tremendous opportunity for us to redevelop it in a way that all residents could benefit.
I would second what Pete had to say. I mean, I think we're very fortunate that, one, we have an excellent developer who's willing to work with the community, and they've done so faithfully, as they said in the beginning. The very first sentence that Mr. Russell of Monument said is, the golf course is no more. It's not a business you want to be in, and we're not competitive with our county golf courses. The golf course was offered to the county. They don't want it either. So I don't see what the options are. I think we have a good developer, an excellent architect working on, and like Pete said, we will have an 80-acre central park that have a lot of amenities that we've always wanted, and it would service the entire community.
Mr. Lechner.
I believe strongly that Montgomery Village has had a lot of benefits by having a golf course in the community. Columbia Association not only has 2 golf courses, but they've spent over $5 million in the last 6 or 7 years rebuilding their fairways, rebuilding the greens, and they're putting $3 million into a new clubhouse at one of the golf courses. But that gives you an idea of the scale of the problem that we face. It's an old golf course. It has fairway and green problems, and the clubhouse is exactly the same as it was 30 years ago, and it's falling apart. So if the community were given the option to take control of the property, either through purchase or a land swap or something, and the community values it enough, it would take roughly 1,000 new residence units in Montgomery Village, which I think is possible through the Village Center and the other properties, for their user fees to be contributing about $6 or $7 million worth of investment to keep the golf course open.
Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Jane?
With the sense that the community did not have an opportunity to provide input.
Elena? Okay. Having worked on the Recreation Committee, I think that everything that happens in the Recreation Committee does go forward to Montgomery Village Foundation. I'm concerned about what you're saying about Ed DeSimon Park, because it had come to the Recreation Committee as a drainage issue, a ponding of water, and that it had to be regraded. I didn't consider it at the time, nor do I know enough about it now that it would have been anything that goes to the Environmental Committee. But I do know the Recreation Committee was fully aware of it because we went out and looked at it. So I think that committees are doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Thank you, Elena. Are there any other questions? This lady.
Called, having done 5 minutes for years, and I would like to know, what is your opinion on bringing back 5 minutes residence time as opposed to the 3? Of course, some people don't use the full 5, et cetera, but what's your view on going back to 5 minutes residence time?
Thank you, Jane. We'll start with Mr. Webb.
Thanks, Jane. I think the whole structure of Montgomery Village is to be open and to have precipitation, there we go, from our residents. And I think the idea of 3 minutes versus 5 minutes might have a lot to do with the issue at hand and the practical elements tied into how much time is that going to take up versus how much time to discuss the issue. I think it is important to not alienate folks and to try to create an animosity of not allowing a chance to speak. But that said, I think there is a balance to be struck of how much time do you need to communicate a view, if it's substantial and if you're able to communicate it well. Is it 3, is it 5? I think there's a balance to be struck, and maybe it's you take a sense of how crowded it is versus how crowded the docket is. There could be a balance to be struck, but I think it's also important to be realistic about time constraints.
Mr. Young?
Thanks for the question, Jane. So having been part of the conversations that actually led to the change from 5 minutes to 3, reverting to the original 3-minute policy of the board for years, I think there was a sensitivity to the duration, of course, in meetings where there are a lot of residents that wish to speak. I'm always happy to rediscuss an issue if we feel like there's a need to revisit policy. The 3-minute, I think the rationale for those who weren't part of that discussion was really bring it in line with all the surrounding jurisdictions and kind of historical practice. 5 minutes, it was expanded from 3 to 5 at some point during the village's history. We could certainly take it up for discussion again if there's a compelling reason. The other thing I would suggest is that there are many other ways to advocate as a resident on behalf of yourself and your position besides the residence time. Unfortunately, we don't have the turnout at meetings that perhaps we would like to hear a broad base of resident opinions. So I think to encourage other ways, such as email letters to the editor and so forth, would be helpful as well to be able to get a balanced discussion.
It's been mostly 5 minutes in my 26 years.
Mr. Clark?
Okay. As I recall, the motion, I think it was 3 minutes was an experiment. I think it was a 6-month experiment. And so I think we ought to sit down and appraise it. I haven't seen any significant difference, but if I think it would meaningful to most of the residents, I'd be for increasing it back to 5 minutes because that's the way it always has been. I don't think we're trying to restrict any conversations. I remember the reason we went to that is one time there was 50 people all signed up. And at 5 minutes apiece, we'd be there till about 12 o'clock, and then we would start the meeting. I mean, there has to be some reasonable, and they're all saying the exact same thing. And there has to be some reasonableness in doing it. But I would support going back to 5 minutes. But I haven't seen any significant difference. A PhD scientist was talking to us about some electrical meters and things like that in the village. And he had a very complex topic. He did it easily in 3 minutes.
That's talent.
Mr. Lechner?
I support 5 minutes. I think at most meetings I've been to, it's 3 to 5 people, 2 more minutes a person, so it's 10 more minutes. I think we should go further than that, though. I think that all of the minutes of the old Montgomery Village meetings and the current ones, we should be archiving them online instead of right now we take them off. I think that we should put some blog type of software up on the website to allow people to post comments, and then also would allow directors and board members to comment on that if they want to or not. I see more interesting things on Don O'Neill's patch blog sometimes than I do over here at the board meetings. Like example, the South Valley needs a playground. I didn't realize that. I went and looked on the Google Map thing, and yeah, they don't have a good playground over there. I also think that the residents should be allowed to email inputs in that would then be posted onto the material for the evening's board meeting, even if it's not necessarily on the agenda. Maybe we ought to have something like a petition drive to put things onto the agenda. I think that's a very reasonable thing to do.
Thank you, Jane. Sue?
I didn't get a chance to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
What are you doing?
My apologies. Mr. O'Neill.
And the first thing I was going to say was, it's all about democracy.
Yes, it is.
It's all about democracy, Jane. This 5 minutes versus 3 minutes, it's all about democracy. And I would say to Dennis, who says he hadn't seen any difference, of course you haven't. The people who didn't think they could get their thoughts together in 3 minutes don't show up. So you don't see those. They're missing in action. I think that there's only one thing worse than going from 5 to 3, and that's going from 3 to 0. At the nominating committee meeting that we had to put us here today, I was denied residence time. I got 0 residence time from Chairman Scott Dyer. He said, you can't be a resident and an applicant at the same time. Well, actually, there's 2 parts to that meeting, so you really could. I think that there's other parts to this, which is MV News. The MV News letters to the editor should be published. Unless there's something absolutely egregious about a letter, they should be published. It's all about democracy.
My apologies, John.
That's okay. I'm just having fun at your expense.
Thank you, Jane. Sue, you had your hand up, right? Okay.
Change the subject a little bit. I'd like to know your views on crime in Montgomery Village, what we can do to reduce or perhaps eliminate crime here in Montgomery Village. I know there are certain areas in town where the police have cautioned me not to go after dark because I'm a woman and I don't let my daughter go there driving alone at night. What are your views on the crime and reducing crime in the village?
Okay, Mr. Clark?
Okay, last May, we had an excellent meeting over in Lake Marion, and Commander Manger, for the head of police force in the county, and the head of the 6th, Mr. Parker Lone, they're going to be adding at least eight or nine people to the Area 6. A special team that's been very successful around the county applying the same techniques, and a detective, and which we had to borrow a detective when we had a problem from another district. So I think that increase in manpower is going to be rather significant, and I'll hold him to his promise.
Mr. Lechner?
I think two things would be useful to consider. One is that we add several more video cameras and surveillance cameras. It's like $200 or $500 for an outdoor camera now, and the networking technology. Now that we've got Wi-Fi all over the place, I understand why we don't have cameras all over the place too. I mean, it helps New York City reduce crime and terrorism. It ought to help us in the village as far as reduce that. And if most of the time it's only watching some geese walk around and chew up the grass, that's okay. It's a nature cam. The other thing is teen centers and teen activities. I think the idle hands saying is really useful to keep in mind. Again, Columbia didn't have a large police force. They had a large teen activity program, and I think that not that our teens are the problem, but I think the combination would be important, useful.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes. Well, one approach to crime is police and stuff. Another approach is community engagement. And gangs have been identified as a big source of crime in Montgomery Village by the police. And here again, I think that if we ask the police to deliver the worst bad actors to the village community center, and we had there these senior people who know how to deal with people of all kinds and all ways because they've been around the block a few times, and turn these people over, these bad actors, over to these senior people. And they're going to be required to be there at first, but then we'll see how much they come back on their own and how much they bring a friend and how much it spreads. I think this would work, and I think it would be a constructive and concrete act that we could take.
Mr. Webb?
I think crime's going to be a reality in any community, regardless of demographics or structure or affluence. It exists. My wife and I lived in D.C. for over a decade. We moved out here, we were burglarized twice in our first 6 months of living here. But that spurred me on to become more active, because I knew it's not the community, it's a symptom, not the reality. And I think the easiest path, you can't answer it in 1 minute, but it's if you develop the community, if you don't have a vacant community center for the most part, if there is a vibrant neighborhood, that's what deters crime. It's not this magic bullet of we read them the story and it's all better now. It's if you change the community as the whole, and there's a presence of residents, there's a presence of people walking their dogs, or feeling safe to walk around neighborhoods. That deters crime in and of itself. It doesn't attract crime if there's multiple residents engaging. If you're one on your own, maybe.
Mr. Young?
So thanks, Sue. I think a few things that we do and can do that actually is materially important. One Dennis alluded to is actually partnering carefully with the police. They actually have developed some additional resources. They've been able to rove around the county to where there are acute needs with a special group that actually is not assigned to a regular beat, and that has actually been helpful. I think the other thing that was talked about is, the community center or the village center is always mentioned. The best way to actually ensure that there aren't empty stores is to shop there. I think, again, if people would patronize the businesses, they wouldn't go out of business. And the more people there, the safer it becomes. So I think making a point of actually going and supporting our local businesses is one thing we can do. As well as the schools. I can speak at least for our high school here, Watkins Mill. The Booster Club is a little bit unique there in that it's an all-school booster club. It's not just the sports. So we support every club and other activity there. Keeping the kids engaged is important. So it's not one thing. And I think, again, elimination of crime is probably a little bit of a fantasy. But crime is a regional problem. It's not local just to our community.
Thank you, Sue. Are there any other questions? The gentleman back there.
So I'll raise, my name is Brad, I'm on Ducker Way. I'll raise this question to all of you, but I'd like to start with Mr. O'Neill. As a resident and a board member, what steps would you recommend that this entire community takes to prevent development of the golf course?
To prevent it?
To prevent it, yep.
Oh, okay.
So for those who may be
Okay,
sitting at home wondering, what do I do? What would the steps be?
Look, we already have the Kettler promise. That should prevent it. That should be it. So I would ask Mr. Hitchens, our general counsel, to take that and find a way to make that stick with the developer. And that would be it.
And if that fails?
Well, then you get into Plan B and Plan C and so forth. We'd have to sit around and talk about how to do it. But that would be a vehicle for making it happen, possibly. So let's exercise that and then come back to the drawing board.
Okay. Thank you. Would anybody else like to share with us how to prevent development of the golf course?
Mr. Webb?
No, I think in terms of a promise or a contractual agreement, I would imagine many attorneys who make far more than I do have looked over it on the county level for monument for all sorts of interested parties. Unfortunately, I think the way that residents would have supported a golf course would be to use the golf course. And I have used the golf course. I enjoyed the golf course. I was in the minority. And I think that's just the reality of it. It was a great amenity for many years, but I think it's shifted. The village has shifted. It doesn't appeal to enough residents to necessitate the space, the beautiful space that it takes up. That I think there's opportunities, and I trust Monument has done their legal research to make sure they're able to develop, and I think there's great opportunities for decades to come with that parcel.
So thanks for the question, Brad. I think alluding to what Don mentioned, Kettler did try to make a promise to the residents through a letter years ago. However, they did absolutely nothing legally to bind the deed of the golf course as a restrictive covenant in any kind. So what we're confronting with as a board today is a private property that has been purchased on the fair market through bankruptcy with no other bidders and no other business operators willing to take that property on as a golf course. So what we have right now is an asset that I think, as Peter mentioned, if the village had been actively supporting the golf course for all these years, we wouldn't be in this position. Unfortunately, we're in an untenable business operations situation, and we have a developer willing to put literally hundreds of millions of dollars into a property that it's the bird in the hand kind of a thing. So I think it behooves us to really try to partner and get the best outcome for the community. Regardless of what we might have liked to have happened, I think we were confronting a reality that may be different.
Mr. Clark?
It's hard not seconding what Pete had to say. I mean, what are our alternatives? It's not our property. We don't want to buy it. Golf is failing across the nation. Golf courses are closing. Why would we get involved in such a thing? We have an opportunity now to do something meaningful with it. It's such a valuable asset. I can't see why we would stop. What we've established a joint committee of people who live surround the golf course to get their viewpoints. I mean, I think we've tried to bend over backwards to make sure we're sensitive to the issues that these people bring to the table, that they have beautiful views and things like that. They paid, in the beginning, paid lot premiums. So we're looking for a recommendation from the joint committee of where they stand on that. And I'm going to make sure that, I think, from what I see now, the developer is sensitive to those issues and sensitive to those people's concerns.
Mr. Lechner?
Some people don't know, I've probably spent hundreds of hours researching and developing position papers, testimony to the committee. I think that our best option at this point, given that Monument Realty has purchased the property and has proposed plans to try and develop housing on most of the property, about half of it's buildable. Personally, I think that if the community should be given the option to provide a golf option for itself. But there's a cost for that. As I said, it's going to take millions of dollars to rebuild the course and build a new clubhouse. I think Monument Realty's would have an attractive option building on the front portion of it, but in the end they may not choose to pursue that option. They might consider housing more, and at that point I think it's a question for what the foundation wants to do as far as supporting growth overall. Personally, I favor smart growth and focusing on the village center.
Thank you. Can I ask my second question now?
Does anyone have a first question? No. Okay.
Okay. Has there been an environmental study done on the impact of development on the golf course? And if so, where can I find that?
That's a factual question.
Yeah, it's a kind of a yes/no question. I played on the course many times as well, and I've seen there's a lot of wildlife, plant life, that sort of thing. I assume that the footprint that is being discussed, it would obviously have a big impact on the environment. So has there been a study?
I really couldn't say, and I'm not sure, well, we can put it to the candidates, but, their answer, yes or no, I'm not sure would have any real meaning unless I know for a fact. Mr. Clark, do you know for a fact?
No, I don't.
I don't know either.
Rich Wilder, has there been a study of the golf course and its environmental impacts? Stand up and be counted, please.
It's not done by the Committee on the Environment.
Mr. Webb? No.
I'm not aware of.
Pete?
I'm not aware of a study that's been performed yet.
All right, thank you.
Perhaps you could address that question to someone at the foundation, to Mr. Humpton after the meeting, or contact him at the foundation tomorrow.
Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Brad.
Sure.
I'm going to put you in the shoes that I've been in several times in my years here in the village. If you were out in your front yard and someone drove by and asked you, said they were thinking about moving in, and what do you think of the local schools, what would you tell them?
Okay. Mr. O'Neill.
Okay, I go by Whetstone every day, and I would tell them they're nice little children. They line up very neatly. They're very well behaved. They have coats. Boys don't want to wear their coats, and they're just like any other kids. And I think that the people here who played a role in PTAs are some of our best people in the whole village, Pete and David and so forth. I would say, and that principal at Watkins Mill, I would say this to that person that's wandering by, these schools are good. They are quite representative of the United States. And you'll be glad you came here to expose your children to that experience.
Mr. Webb?
I think as our tax bills show in Montgomery County that we have excellent schools, and I think Montgomery Village is exceptional apart from that because of what Don said, that there's such representation, and it gave us, my wife and I, the confident feeling that we could move here and we don't have to leave for, it's not like, oh wait, we have to, DC, we didn't feel comfortable sending our kids to school in DC. That's why we came to Montgomery Village. We were those people. of driving by say, do we like that? And what draws us here? And I mean, we have world-class schools, and maybe sometimes on the county metrics we don't match up with them, but it's sort of like the guy who gets silver in the 100-meter dash. Like, they're exceptional schools top to bottom, and I have no hesitation to tell anybody that.
Well, given that my wife asked the question, she probably knows where I stand, but I fundamentally can reinforce that we do have world-class schools, and I can assure you, having spent our family time raising our kids in the county schools and being very heavily involved, our schools are world-class. I would tell you that until you've met some of the faculty that teach at the high school and at the middle school and elementary school, they're unbelievably impressive. Whether it's the IB curriculum, the International Baccalaureate curriculum we have in the middle years program at our middle school, or just the Montgomery County curriculum itself. We are the envy of the nation when it comes to public schools. The other thing that is also important to note, the diversity of our community that someone earlier asked the question, is an extraordinarily rich asset that we have that people should not discount. My children have grown up in a truly multicultural environment that is probably as close to colorblind as you can imagine at a naive and innocent level. That has formed their opinion, and my daughter, in fact, discounted colleges immediately upon minutes on the campus when she looked around and there was no diversity, and she discounted them. So I think it's a testament to the worldview that we have here in the county.
Mr. Clark?
I'm way past the school thing. All my kids are out. But I'm mentoring one of my grandsons in a robotics club. And what he has learned, I mean, we would do that in our research lab many years ago. He's doing that now. A very complex problem and a very diverse team, very talented children. I mean, I don't know where we would ever get that before. And he's also joined some Academy of Finance. I mean, outstanding programs. So I think our schools are just as good as the schools in the county overall. I mean, the county in general, people want to buy our system of educating. At least that's what I thought.
Mr. Lechner?
I think we have great schools. We have IB program at Watkins Mill, which is awesome. I helped create some of the program at Stedwick Elementary School, which is just fabulous. But I think you don't sometimes realize what you are missing till you get other exposure as well. Two of my children have gone through the schools here locally, geographically. My one daughter, actually both my daughters, had an opportunity to do some time in the magnet programs in Montgomery County schools. My son at Neilsville had, I think, 2 field trip days besides outdoor ed in 3 years. My daughter was averaging 15 to 20 field trip days per year at the magnet middle school. And I think that it's important. I would say it's a great school system that we have here. Anyone should buy into Montgomery County that can come. But I think I'd like to convene a committee, an education committee within the village structure that would involve the PTA presidents and principals and stakeholders, open stakeholders, but talk about what else we can do to strengthen the schools here.
Thank you, Susan. Are there any other questions? We are getting very close to 8:30, which is our closing time. We probably have time for one more question. Jane?
I didn't hear, this is a question. I thought everybody was to announce their name when they asked a question, and I came late that I didn't hear some of the names. Will this be printed in the Village News? Who answered the question? Who asked the questions?
Yes, it will be.
Because of some of the people are not familiar to me.
Right.
And I think it's really important. And also the call-in or emailed questions, did you say who asked those?
We did not read any.
You didn't have any of
Well,
those?
we had some, but the gentleman who sent them in actually came tonight, so we did not.
Who was that?
Mr. Berman.
Okay.
Thank you, Jane. Okay. Well, I want to thank you all for attending the Candidates Forum. The transcript will be published in the Village News, and an audio and video transcript will appear on the Foundation website. Please ask your neighbors and friends to vote, and this is a good way of finding out the candidates' positions on these issues. Thank you again, and drive home safely.
Thanks very much, Pam. Did a great job.
Thanks, Pam.